In September of 1939, Nazi Germany, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, launched an invasion into Poland, which officially started World War II. World War II in Europe was going to be unlike any other war. This wasn't just a war of conquest. This was a war that was waged for Germany to remake the European continent, and maybe even the world at large, in its own image. And part of that reshaping would involve making Europe what they called Judenfrei, or Jew-free. There was a large Jewish population in Poland, and a lot of these cities were just absolutely wrecked. And the stories that come out of here are some of the most tragic of the 20th century. And one of the cities that was hit the hardest was the city that I'm in right now, in Krakow, Poland. So after the occupation of Poland, the Nazi government made Krakow the seat of the general government, and the man who was placed in charge of this whole area was one of the Nazi leaders by the name of Hans Frank. And he set up his headquarters right here at a place called Wawel Castle. Now, as I mentioned, this is Wawel Castle. We're standing in the courtyard right now. And during the Nazi occupation, as I mentioned, this served as kind of like the headquarters for Hans Frank, who was the Governor General of Poland. And during World War II, or at the beginning in September of 1939, there were 260,000 residents in Krakow. 25% of them were Jewish. Okay, so if this is going to be like the provincial seat of the Nazi government, having 25% of your population being Jewish is going to be problematic. So in November of 1939, Jews had to be registered, and then once Hans Frank moves in, they start having their rights rolled back. Bank accounts were frozen. They were limited on how much cash they could carry. The Hebrew language was forbidden. And on December 1st, the Jews were forced to start wearing armbands with the Star of David on them. But this is where Hans Frank had his main offices during World War II. We're here at the other side of the castle now, and if you walk out here, well, there's this really nice balcony that overlooks the city of Krakow, and right back in this area, well, there's a tenement or an apartment complex that housed someone who lived here during World War II that you might be familiar with. When it comes to movies that have been made about the Holocaust, arguably the best one is Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List. This is a movie about a Nazi named Oskar Schindler, who was a businessman. He was a womanizer. He had been a spy at one point. He was a war profiteer. And whenever the occupation of Poland took place, he moved into Krakow to set up a business operation. Well, Oskar Schindler is probably most well known for saving the lives of hundreds of Jewish individuals during the Holocaust. And his apartment here in Krakow is right here behind me. Again, this is the apartment of Oskar Schindler. Now, if I'm not mistaken, he actually lived up on the 3rd floor, on the opposite side of the building from where we are now. And something that many people may not realize is that the movie Schindler's List was filmed on location right here in Krakow, at the very spots where men like Oskar Schindler and Amon Goth and all of these others lived and operated during World War II. So there are a couple of scenes where you'll see Liam Neeson, who played Oskar Schindler, coming out of this very door. And there's another scene where Oskar Schindler comes out and he notices something that looks like snow coming down, and it's the ashes of bodies being cremated over at Flashow. And the scene turns and you can see Wawel Castle in the background. But yeah, that was all filmed right here on location at Oskar Schindler's very apartment. A lot of people have a misunderstanding about the Holocaust and how it was rolled out. The common misconception is that, whenever Nazis moved into a city or into an area, they rounded up all the Jews and then sent them to death camps like Auschwitz. That's not really what happened. There was more of a progression from the occupation up to places like Auschwitz. So here in Krakow, as I mentioned, in late 1939, Jews were required to register, and then they saw their rights and their civil liberties slowly rolled back. They were subjected to all sorts of abuse and inhumane treatment. Well, in the summer of 1940, there was a resettlement that took place where a lot of the Jewish people in Krakow were sent off to other areas. And then, again, things kind of leveled off. Again, they're still subjected to all forms of abuse and humiliation here in the city. But in March of 1941, the district governor of Krakow, a guy by the name of Otto von Wachter, ordered the establishment of what was called a Jewish housing district on the south side of the Vistula River. We know them better today as ghettos. Right now I'm standing on the north bank of the Vistula River, and prior to the Nazi occupation in 1939, this area right up here was the traditional Jewish area of Krakow. Well, whenever the ghetto got established, it was on the south side of the river, which was a poor district, and the Jews of Krakow were given 2 weeks to get all of their belongings and make their way to this ghetto. This is concentrating the Jewish population down even more for something more sinister in the future. Now, there were 2 bridges that they crossed. The other one has been destroyed, but this is one of the original bridges that the Jews of Krakow would have crossed to get to the Krakow Ghetto. This is also where one of the scenes from Schindler's List was filmed. Now, of course, in 1941, they would have been moving this direction to the south to get to the ghetto. In the movie, they are moving in the opposite direction, and that's because there were some modern buildings that were causing some problems, and they wanted it, of course, to look more authentic. So we've now moved over into the area of the Krakow Ghetto, and as you might expect, there are a lot of newer buildings here, but there are also a lot of the original buildings. Krakow was one of the cities that was really spared in Poland during World War II and didn't see the destruction like what you saw in Warsaw. And during the early 40s, after this ghetto was established, I mean, you can only imagine the scene here. It would have been overcrowded. Again, these poor Jewish people subjected to just all kinds of abuses and horrors. And there's a few places that we're going to stop and take a look at here. There's a building right here on the corner of, I think it's Janawa Wola and Dubravki is how I'm going to pronounce it. That's probably not right. But anyway, this was the site of just a terrible murder of several elderly people in 1942 by, of course, the Nazis who were guarding the Krakow Ghetto. And it was said that there was so much blood in the streets that it was like slippery to try and walk across. But just awful what these people had to live through. Now, originally, the Krakow Ghetto was enclosed in barbed wire. But in the spring of 1941, the Germans started looking for a more permanent solution. So construction started on a wall that would completely enclose the people here in the Krakow Ghetto. Most of that wall is gone, but there's still a portion of it that remains here today. So again, what we are looking at is the only remaining section of wall from the Krakow Ghetto. Now, as I mentioned, construction on this started in March of 1941, and it was done during Passover. So it's kind of a cynical thing to take one of the most important Jewish holidays and then construct this wall. And you might notice that the wall isn't just like a straight line wall, but it has kind of like these arches. That is not accidental, and it's not just for ornate purposes. These are designed to look like Jewish tombstones. So this was the Nazis' way of saying that where you are right now is going to be your final resting place. All right, so we've moved to a different part of Krakow, south of the river here. And we've talked about Oskar Schindler already a few times. So Schindler had got a contract with the Nazi German government to set up an enamel factory here. And at first he employed the Jewish people until it became illegal for Jews to maintain employment. So then he, worked bribes and spent a lot of his fortune securing Jewish individuals to work at this enamel factory right here. Well, today the Schindler Enamel Factory has been converted into a museum that kind of goes through the experience of the people in this city during the German occupation. So we're going to go in, and I don't know what to expect. I've heard a few things, but we're going to go in and see what we can learn. So we just got into the factory and museum here, and the first room that you walk into is a bunch of pictures. So we're looking at like wedding pictures and family pictures, all kind of giving the sense of reality that we're dealing with, real people who had real lives and had all of that taken away from them. Here's something that I really like. I really enjoy going through old photo albums. So they have this kind of a copy of an old photo album that gives us a bit of a snapshot as we flip through it as to what life in this city looked like prior to the Nazi occupation. So again, what they're doing here is kind of creating an immersive experience about what life was like in this city. So August 31st, last day of summer, and here they kind of have something set up to look like a train station. So a lot of people would have been coming back from their summer vacations, and you would have also had a lot of panic, hysteria about the possible war that was getting ready to befall this country. And then, of course, on September 1st of 1939, everything for this country gets turned upside down. So here they're talking about the beginning of the war, and also how this country got divided up between the Germans and the Soviets. Here they have something showing the progression of the offensive. So that yellow line is showing the Krakow army, and red is the units of the Third Reich. So we get to the 5th and 6th of September, and you can see that Krakow has now fallen between the 7th and the 16th. So on October 12th of 1939, Adolf Hitler established the general government here in Poland. And as I mentioned earlier, the head of the general government was going to be a guy by the name of Hans Frank. And Krakow was going to be the seat of that general government. So this is a proclamation from Der General Gouverneur, Frank. We are now standing in the office of Oskar Schindler. So here at the factory they made enamelware, and they also made metal products, as you can see here. Now most of this museum is set up to kind of interpret what happened in the city. But they do have a little bit here talking about Schindler and his work. And if we walk in here, well, they have all of the names of the people that he helped to save. One of the things that Nazi Germany wanted to do whenever they moved into Poland was essentially Germanize this area. Well, part of that involved tearing down some of the old monuments that were important to Polish culture, and you can see here some of the remnants of one of those statues that was taken down. What we're looking at here are photos that German soldiers took from whenever they were sightseeing in Krakow. So they would have been taking photos of, you know, some of these more well-known places, getting souvenirs, all kinds of things like that. Again, regardless of who it's from, I always enjoy looking at these photos because it gives us a snapshot into the history of what happened. Again, what we are looking at here are photos that show the Germanization of Krakow's urban spaces that involved demolishing some of these Polish monuments. As we're moving through here, we get into this section where it starts talking a little bit about the reprisals and some of the brutal means by which the Nazis ruled over this new occupied area. Earlier we talked about the resettlement of the Jewish people into the Krakow Ghetto, and we were at the bridge that went over the river. Well, here are some pictures showing that resettlement process. Absolutely awful. We visited the remaining piece of wall from the Krakow Ghetto earlier. Here are some pictures showing the construction of that wall. Now, in German propaganda, they said that Jewish people carried diseases, so isolating them to this ghetto, they said, was for the protection of the Germans and the Poles. Now, prior to the establishment of the ghetto, there were about 3,000 people that inhabited that area, and afterwards it had to accommodate 17,000 residents. As we continue to move through the exhibition, they talk a little bit about the liquidation of the Krakow Ghetto, and then whenever you turn the corner, well, now it's to Flashow concentration camp. We've pretty much made our way through the entire museum now, and the last thing that you see as you leave here are all of these portrait photographs. These are all men and women who were employed by Oskar Schindler here in this very factory during World War II. And not only did he save these lives, but if you think about it, these people survived. They went on to have families of their own. So the work that Oskar Schindler did really had a ripple effect that literally went for generations. All right, well, that was just a little bit of Oskar Schindler's enamel factory. Very, very interesting museum. Very, very well done and laid out, and the fact that they have it here in Schindler's actual factory, where all of these people worked and survived, yeah, really is something else. All right, we got one more stop that we're going to make. We've moved to an area that is known as Heroes Square. I've also seen it called Jewish Heroes Square and also Ghetto Heroes Square. Prior to the war, it had been kind of like a marketplace. But during the German occupation, you can imagine just the confusion and mayhem here as people were being moved into the ghetto and their furniture and belongings were just piled up in this area. And then it would be used as a place where people could get out of the stifling conditions of the tenements that they were living in. And tragically, as the ghettos were being liquidated, this was a sorting place where the Jews who were living in the ghetto would either be sent to death camps like Auschwitz or to some of these labor camps like Flashow. In March of 1943, the Krakow Ghetto was liquidated, and in the process about 2,000 people were killed. So you can imagine just the chaos and the mayhem that was taking place here in this square and on these streets. 8,000 of those people ended up being sent to a local concentration camp known as Flashow, which we're going to be going to after this. You may have noticed a lot of empty chairs here in the square. Those chairs kind of represent the emptiness of this city after the war. If you think about, you know, like at a holiday after a family member has died, you sit down for a meal and that chair is empty. It's the absence of presence and the presence of absence is what I've heard it described as before. And after World War II, there certainly would have been an absence here in Krakow. Of the 60,000 Jews who inhabited this city before the war, only 5,000 were here when it was all over. But anyway, right now we're going to hop back in the vehicle and head over to Flashow concentration camp.